No domestic drilling in new areas is going to go forward until there is a adequate review of what's happened here and of what is being proposed elsewhere.
So much for that offshore drilling policy President Obama recently announced.
That's one big spill and one big policy shift in response. Top Line starts right now.
Hello and welcome to ABCNews.com's Top Line. I'm David Chalian.
And I'm Rick Klein.
Each weekday we're bringing you the very latest political headlines, reporting, insight, analysis, everything you need and want to know about politics.
And it's twitter.com/The Note. Follow us all day long, all weekend long. Big weekend in Washington, of course.
Big weekend in Washington. Get us started, sir. What is your top line today?
Heck of a spill. The K word is close to everyone's lips as the Obama administration scrambles to coordinate a federal response to a worsening situation along the Gulf Coast. We see David Axelrod taking care of the oil drilling part of the equation, saying that there's going to be a hold on these new plans to open up additional areas for oil leases. But this is really developing, I think, into a test for the administration and how you manage a big national crisis. This is a serious situation in the Gulf Coast, and we're seeing now the full resources of the federal government brought to bear.
Any kind of crisis like this is a test for any administration. There's no doubt about it. The president went out into the Rose Garden yet again, second day in a row now, started his comments, what were supposed to be about the economy, first talking about the Gulf Coast and saying he dispatched Napolitano and Salazar down there. All hands on deck. This administration is trying very much to make sure they seem on top of it, in control, and responding to constantly changing developments down on the Gulf Coast. Economic growth. Yes, that was the message that the president went to the Rose Garden to speak about. The economy grew at a solid 3.2% during the first quarter of this year. And what the administration is pointing to here as the key number to look at is that this growth is fueled by consumer spending. That is a key piece of information. It's not the 5.6% growth we saw in the fourth quarter, but it is part of a story that this administration wants to tell for the next 6 months leading up to the midterms. The trend lines are going in the growth direction.
That's right. And the question will be whether people get it, whether people believe it in time for the election, because clearly the pieces are in place for economic growth for Democrats to tell that story, but people have to buy it.
Unemployment is still really high.
Exactly right. Florida fallout. Charlie Crist made it official last night, became an independent, declared his candidacy, and we've seen all the expected fallout. We've seen donors asking for their money back. We've seen staff and pollsters leaving. We've seen Senator George Lemieux, his handpicked successor, say he can't support Charlie Crist anymore. This is going to be a window of time for Charlie Crist to define himself and define his candidacy. I don't think we quite heard what it's about in his announcement last night, but he's got the media attention right now, and I think if he's going to be able to be very competitive and maybe even win this seat, a lot of those pieces are going to have to fall into place relatively quickly.
I agree. The Lemieux statement is fascinating. This guy was supposed to simply be a seat warmer, the guy that ran his 06 campaign, his chief of staff in Florida. This is Charlie Crist guy. He landed him in that seat, and it was supposed to just keep the seat warm until Crist got there. Washington's weekend, as Rick alluded to earlier today. For one weekend a year, Washington tries very hard to have as much cool as Hollywood. It never really works out, but the event that's been branded Nerd Prom is coming up this weekend, and we're going to kick off the ritualistic, self-reverential weekend here with just one of the greats who lives at the nexus between media and politics. So we'll get to that a little bit later in the show.
Not cool? Speak for yourself on that. I think we're pretty cool this one weekend a year at least.
Nice try, Rick.
All right.
Okay, so we're going to begin with the big news of the day with Senator Ben Cardin. He's a Democrat from Maryland. He joins us from Baltimore today. Senator Cardin, let's begin with the oil spill down in the Gulf. I know that you and your colleague, Senator Mikulski, were opposed to the president's offshore drilling announcement that he named earlier, about a month ago, and I'm sure that this gives you even some more support to that opposition, but the administration is saying, listen, we're not going forward with that offshore drilling unless all the science is there. We've investigated all of this. Does that give you a little more support for the administration's position to look into offshore drilling in the future?
Well, first, let me just express our sorrow for what's happened. I mean, our first attention is to try to minimize the damage that's been caused, the loss of life. Our sympathy goes out to the families. But quite frankly, no, this is the most sophisticated rig that we have in the world. $600 million to build, and look what happened. If we would have had a similar episode where the president would have opened up drilling along the Virginia coast, it could have had catastrophic impact on the Chesapeake Bay and on our beaches. Our entire summer season could have been destroyed. So no, I want to see the president reverse his policy. I don't believe the little bit of oil that might be out there is worth the type of risk that we now see becoming a fact in the Gulf of Mexico.
So this step, to be clear, is not enough. Saying that it's not going to happen in the interim. What do you make of the federal response? Has President Obama done everything appropriate, and the administration done everything appropriate to respond to this? Because it seems like it's getting worse by the day.
Well, I think it's too early to tell. Quite frankly, the original estimates that were given by the people responsible was much lower than what it was in reality. As you know, we heard it was 1,000 barrels a day. Now it's 5,000 barrels a day. It might take a couple months before they can plug the holes. I think that information was not made available originally. I think the investigation will show whether they knew more and just didn't call for help soon enough. But quite frankly, I think it's just too early to judge the effectiveness of the federal response.
Senator Cardin, you said there may be the little bit of oil that may be off the Atlantic coast, but as gas prices start skyrocketing again this summer, isn't the notion of sort of an all-of-the-above energy policy needed in this country, not just from an economic standpoint, but also a national security standpoint?
Well, there's tens of millions of acres available for current oil and gas exploration that hasn't been done yet. Much of that area is in totally safe areas onshore. So there's plenty of areas that we can explore. But look at this. We have about 2 to 3% of the world's reserves in oil, and we consume 25%. Yes, we need to have a comprehensive energy policy, but we got to focus on renewable and alternative energy sources. That's where we need to do. We have to use less energy. So I think there's an answer here, and I'm strongly supporting an energy policy for America that makes us energy secure, creates the jobs, and is friendly towards our environment. Last point on this. We've got to get off of fossil fuels. That's what's causing the greenhouse gas emissions, the carbon emissions. So it's in our interest to get off of oil.
All right, Senator, I want to turn your attention to the Supreme Court vacancy as a member of the Judiciary Committee. First, what kind of timeline are you expecting? Do you think we'll have a pick next week, and where does the committee go from there?
Well, I did have a chance to talk to the president. I serve on the Judiciary Committee, and I think the president will name his nominee within the next week or two. That will start the clock rolling, I think, in Congress. And Chairman Leahy has indicated that he intends to follow a similar time schedule that we use for Justice Sotomayor and Chief Justice Roberts. So I think you're going to see a lot of activities shortly.
Was there anything about the Sotomayor process, the confirmation hearings for Sotomayor at the Judiciary Committee, that you guys want to improve upon, or you thought that on both sides of the aisle, you thought that process worked?
Well, I thought the process worked. Quite frankly, a lot of us wanted to be able to have an open process, to let it go through before a lot of the name calling that we saw before the hearings itself. So, no, I think we want an open process. Each nominee is different. We have to see who that nominee is and what the background is before we'll be able to determine exactly how to proceed.
You've seen some of the saber rattling from the Republican side. I mean, do you kind of consider it a given that no matter who the president picks, this is going to be a big battle that Republicans are going to gear in and try to demonize and obstruct?
Well, I hope not the latter, but clearly the appointment to the Supreme Court is a major event, and I do expect it to be a thorough, comprehensive discussion. And I respect all the colleagues, both Democrats and Republicans, who want to make sure this is a thorough process. But I hope it doesn't become one in which they obstruct or that they get sidetracked on politics rather than sticking to the nominee and the qualifications.
Do you have a favorite of all the shortlisters you've seen?
Well, I know many of them, and I think the president has a very qualified list to choose from.
You don't have a favorite?
I've talked to the president, but I think I'll avoid that question.
At least you're honest about that, sir.
I like that.
We'll take you at your word. Senator Ben Cardin, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you.